Some of the most trusted safety systems ever installed in vehicles, systems that were supposed to save lives, ended up doing the opposite. They reported safe when tires were seconds from catastrophic failure. They passed government approval while displaying pressures that would get a tire shop shut down today. And in a few cases, the system itself caused the exact blowout it was designed to prevent. If you have ever trusted that little light on your dashboard to tell you when your tires need air, number 14 is going to make you check your pressures manually tonight. Make sure you subscribe because I dig through decades of regulatory filings and recall documents so you do not have to. Firestone Wilderness AT on the Ford Explorer came with a tire pressure monitoring system that was optional on some models in the late 90s. This was before federal mandates, before standardized testing. The system used an indirect method that measured wheel speed through the ABS sensors. If one tire was low, it would rotate faster than the others, and the system would alert you. Except it did not account for uneven wear. It did not account for all 4 tires losing pressure equally. And critically, it did not account for the specific failure mode of the Wilderness AT, which was tread separation at highway speeds even when the tire appeared properly inflated. The system would show green, the tire would explode. Over 271 deaths were linked to these tires between the mid-90s and early 2000s. The monitoring system never warned most of them. It was measuring the wrong thing entirely. The Tread Act passed in 2000, forcing direct pressure monitoring within 6 years. These indirect systems that measured rotational differences instead of actual air pressure are now completely illegal on new passenger vehicles. They were not just unreliable, they created false confidence in a system that was actively killing people. The Schrader EZ sensor used on certain General Motors vehicles from 2006 through 2009 had a threshold problem. Federal law required the warning light to illuminate when tire pressure dropped 25% below the recommended cold inflation level. Sounds reasonable. Except the recommended pressure for many of these vehicles was 35 psi. 25% below that is 26 psi. A tire at 26 psi under highway load and summer heat is already operating in dangerous territory. The rubber flexes more, heat builds, the sidewall fatigues. Blowout risk climbs exponentially below 30 psi on most passenger tires, but the system was programmed to meet the legal minimum, not the safe minimum. Drivers would see no warning light. The tire was already past the point where a responsible technician would refuse to let you leave the shop. GM issued a technical service bulletin in 2008 allowing dealers to reprogram the threshold lower, which MEA-NT Chinese letter DRIVERS earlier, but it was not a recall. It was optional. The regulation was later tightened. By 2014, NHTSA clarified that the 25% threshold had to account for real-world safety margins, not just mathematical compliance. Systems now trigger warnings closer to 30% drops, and some manufacturers program even tighter tolerances. That 2006 Silverado with factory sensors might still be out there, waiting until 26 psi to tell you something is wrong. By then, the damage is already happening. The Continental VDO REDI sensor marketed in the aftermarket from 2005 onward had a different issue. It was a direct sensor. It measured actual pressure. It transmitted to the vehicle computer. And it was wrong, not every time, not predictably, but often enough that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened an investigation in 2012. The sensor used a capacitive pressure transducer that was sensitive to temperature fluctuations and electrical interference. In cold weather, it would report pressures 3 to 5 psi higher than actual. In hot weather, it would drift the other direction. If you checked the readout on a summer afternoon after highway driving, it might show 38 psi. The tire was actually at 42. That does not sound catastrophic until you remember that maximum sidewall pressure on most passenger tires is 44 psi. You are now 2 pounds from a blowout and your dashboard says you are fine. The sensors were not recalled. They were quietly discontinued. NHTSA tightened accuracy requirements in 2013, mandating that sensors report within 1 psi of actual pressure across a temperature range of -40 to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. The VDO units could not meet that standard. They vanished from the market. If your car has aftermarket sensors installed between 2005 and 2013, you might want to verify which brand they are. The Mitsubishi i-ME EV sold in the United States from 2012 to 2017 came with a factory system that had an alert delay. The car would detect low pressure, it would log the fault, and then it would wait. The system averaged pressure readings over a rolling 30-minute window to avoid false alarms from temperature changes or brief drops. Reasonable in theory, catastrophic in practice. If you picked up a nail on the highway and pressure started dropping, the system would not alert you until 30 minutes of average data confirmed a trend. By that time, depending on the size of the puncture, you could be down 10 psi or more. The tire could already be riding on a dangerously flexed sidewall. One documented case in 2014 involved a driver who lost 15 psi over 20 miles of highway driving before the warning illuminated. The tire blew seconds after the light came on. No recall was ever issued because the system technically met federal requirements. It warned at 25% loss. It just did not warn fast enough. Current regulations still do not specify alert speed, only threshold. Manufacturers have quietly shortened averaging windows after several similar incidents across brands, but there is no standardized maximum delay. Some systems alert within 60 seconds. Some still take 10 minutes. The Dill Air Control's 9000 series, widely sold to tire shops as a TPMS reset tool and sensor tester in the early 2000s, had a calibration drift issue. Shops used it to verify that sensors were reading accurately after installation. The tool itself was inaccurate. It used a basic analog pressure gauge that would lose calibration after as few as 50 uses, especially if dropped or exposed to temperature swings in a shop environment. A technician would install new sensors, test them with the Dill tool, see matching readings, and send the customer away. The sensors were fine. The tool was reading 2 psi low. The customer drove away thinking they had 35 psi. They had 33. Multiply that across thousands of tire shops over 5 years and you have a massive population of vehicles running underinflated with recently verified sensors. Dill updated the tool in 2009 with digital calibration and a self-check feature, but the older units stayed in circulation for years. NHTSA started recommending that shops verify TPMS tools against a certified master gauge annually, but it is not legally required. Some shops still use uncalibrated test equipment. Your brand new sensors might be perfect. The tool that checked them might not be. The Honda Accord Hybrid from 2005 had sensors that could not handle the extra weight. The hybrid battery pack added roughly 300 pounds compared to the non-hybrid model. Honda specified higher tire pressures to compensate, 38 psi front, 36 rear. The TPMS was calibrated to the standard Accord, which ran 32 psi. The system would not trigger a warning until pressure dropped below 24 psi, which was 25% below the non-hybrid threshold. But the hybrid needed higher baseline pressure. By the time the light came on, the tires were operating at pressures appropriate for a vehicle 600 pounds lighter. The sidewalls were dangerously overloaded. Honda issued a software update in 2006 that recalibrated the warning threshold to match the hybrid's actual specifications, but it required a dealer visit. Not every owner got the notice. Not every dealer performed the update even when the car came in for service. Some of those first-year hybrids are still out there with the wrong threshold programmed. The tire pressure sticker on the door jamb says 38 psi. The computer does not care until you hit 24. The Autel TS401 TPMS diagnostic tool sold to professional shops and enthusiasts from 2013 to 2016 had a programming flaw that affected Chrysler vehicles. When programming new sensors, the tool would occasionally write the wrong pressure threshold to the sensor. Instead of the vehicle's specified 35 psi triggering a warning at 26 psi, the sensor would be programmed to trigger at 20 psi. Flat out dangerous. The error occurred in roughly 2% of programming attempts, usually when the tool's firmware was out of date or the vehicle battery voltage was low during the procedure. Autel released multiple firmware updates to address it, but the tool did not force updates. A shop could run outdated software indefinitely. Chrysler started seeing unusual patterns of TPMS complaints in 2015. Customers reported that their warning lights would not come on even with visibly low tires. Dealers would test the sensors and find them programmed to absurdly low thresholds. Autel never issued a recall of the tool. They released a service bulletin recommending that all Chrysler TPMS programming be verified with a secondary scan tool. Most shops do not own 2 TPMS tools. The bad programming stayed in the system until someone manually caught it. The Pacific Industrial TPMS sensors used on certain Mazda models from 2008 to 2011 had a battery issue that caused erratic behavior at the end of their service life. TPMS sensors are powered by internal lithium batteries designed to last 7 to 10 years. As the battery depletes, the sensor is supposed to trigger a malfunction light, distinct from the low-pressure warning. The Pacific sensors did not always do that. Instead, as voltage dropped, they would start reporting incorrect pressures, usually higher than actual. A tire at 30 psi would show as 34. The driver would assume everything was fine. The malfunction indicator would never light because the sensor was still transmitting. It was just transmitting bad data. Mazda switched suppliers in 2012 and the issue disappeared, but they never recalled the Pacific sensors already in service. Owners started noticing the problem only when they manually checked pressures and found discrepancies. By 2015, most of those sensors had fully died and been replaced during normal service. But for several years, there was a quiet population of Mazdas driving around with sensors that were confidently wrong. If you own a Mazda from that generation and your sensors have never been replaced, check the manufacturing date. If they are original, the batteries are dead or dying. The readings are not trustworthy even if the malfunction light is not on. The bend pack tire pressure monitoring display systems sold to commercial fleets in the early 2000s allowed centralized monitoring of multiple vehicles. A dispatcher could see tire pressures across an entire fleet from one screen, great for maintenance planning, terrible for real-time safety. The system updated readings every 4 hours when vehicles were parked and connected to a wireless hub. If a truck left the yard with proper pressures and picked up a puncture an hour into a route, the system would not know until the truck returned and reconnected. Drivers were supposed to check their own dash warnings, but many fleet vehicles had the individual dash warnings disabled to reduce nuisance alerts. The fleet manager would only see the problem hours after the tire had gone flat or blown. Several regional delivery companies experienced multiple blowouts before realizing the monitoring system was giving them stale data. BendPack updated the system in 2007 to allow real-time cellular reporting, but the older hubs stayed in use at smaller fleets for years. There was no regulation requiring real-time updates. There still is not. Fleet monitoring systems only have to report accurately, not quickly. If the data is 6 hours old but correct, it meets the standard. The TRW automotive TPMS sensors installed on certain Jaguar and Land Rover models from 2009 to 2012 had a mounting issue that caused pressure loss independent of the tire. The sensor mounted inside the wheel with a rubber grommet seal around the valve stem. TRW used a grommet material that degraded quickly when exposed to certain tire sealants and tire shine products. The rubber would crack. Air would leak around the valve stem, not through the tire itself. The sensor would detect dropping pressure and alert the driver. The driver would inspect the tire, find no visible puncture, and assume the sensor was malfunctioning. They would reset the warning and keep driving. Pressure would drop again. The cycle would repeat. Eventually, the tire would be low enough to suffer sidewall damage and the driver would blame the tire. TRW quietly switched grommet materials in 2012 after multiple complaints, but there was no recall. Jaguar issued a technical service bulletin recommending valve stem replacement if a vehicle showed repeated pressure loss with no obvious leak. Most owners never saw the bulletin. They just kept resetting the warning and replacing tires that were not actually defective. The sensor was telling the truth. The valve stem it was attached to was the problem. The AC Delco TPMS sensors on certain Buick and Cadillac models from 2007 had a frequency interference problem in specific regions. The sensors transmitted pressure data at 315 MHz, a frequency shared by some older garage door openers and aftermarket car alarms. In neighborhoods with high concentrations of those devices, the vehicle's TPMS receiver would pick up interference and either fail to read the sensors or read them intermittently. The driver would see a malfunction light. They would go to the dealer. The dealer would test the sensors and find them working perfectly in the shop away from the interference. The customer would drive home. The light would come back on. GM released a software update that changed the sensor polling frequency slightly to avoid the most common interference patterns, but it did not eliminate the issue entirely. Some owners in dense urban areas reported persistent malfunction warnings that no amount of service could fix. The sensors were fine. The environment was too noisy. Current TPMS regulations require sensors to operate across a wider frequency range with better filtering to avoid this, but older vehicles are grandfathered in. If you live in an area with older infrastructure and you get intermittent TPMS malfunctions that the dealer cannot replicate, radio interference might be the actual cause. The system is not broken, it is just getting shouted over. The Smart Tire system sold as a retrofit option in the late 90s and early 2000s mounted sensors on the outside of the valve stem cap, not inside the wheel. Convenient, no need to break the bead and dismount the tire, just screw on the sensor and pair it with a dash display. The problem was theft and vulnerability. The sensors were visible, worth about $30 each, and trivially easy to steal. Parking lots saw waves of sensor thefts. Owners would come back to find all 4 sensors gone and no way to monitor pressure until they bought replacements. Worse, the external sensors were exposed to road debris. A rock kicked up at highway speed could shatter the sensor. The driver would lose monitoring on that tire and not know if subsequent pressure loss was from a puncture or just a missing sensor. The system also relied on the valve cap threads to maintain a seal, and if the sensor was not tightened perfectly, it would create a slow leak. Smart Tire went out of business in 2009. Internal TPMS became federally required, making external sensors obsolete. But thousands of vehicles still have the mounting stems for these sensors, and some owners still try to use them. They are not illegal. They are just pointless and unreliable compared to modern systems. If you see a car with bulky valve stem caps that look like tiny radio transmitters, that is a Smart Tire retrofit. The technology is 20 years obsolete. The orange electronic TPMS sensors used on some Subaru models from 2012 to 2014 had a cold weather failure mode. Below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the sensor's internal voltage regulator would malfunction and cause the sensor to report pressure roughly 10% higher than actual. A tire at 30 psi would show as 33. Cold air already reduces tire pressure naturally, about 1 psi for every 10-degree drop in temperature. So a tire properly inflated to 35 psi in summer could be at 30 psi in winter. The sensor would report 33. The driver would think they were fine. The tire was actually underinflated and at risk, especially under load. Subaru switched to a different supplier in late 2014 after regional service centers in northern states reported unusual patterns of winter tire failures. No recall, no official bulletin, just a quiet supplier change. Vehicles with the orange sensors already installed kept them. If you own a Subaru from that window and you live somewhere with real winter, do not trust the dashboard reading when temperatures drop. Check manually. The Bardec USA TPMS reset tools sold to tire shops from 2010 onward had a user error vulnerability. The tool required the technician to input the vehicle year, make, and model to load the correct sensor programming protocol. If the technician selected the wrong model variant, the tool would still program the sensors, but with incorrect pressure thresholds. A Jeep Grand Cherokee and a Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT used different tire sizes and different pressure specs, but the tool menu listed them almost identically. A rush technician could select the wrong one. The sensors would be programmed to the SRT's higher thresholds even though the vehicle was a standard model. The warning light would not trigger until pressures were dangerously low for that vehicle's actual weight and tire rating. Bardec added confirmation prompts and VIN scanning to later versions of the tool, but the older units are still in circulation. There is no regulatory requirement that TPMS programming tools verify vehicle specs against a database. The tool trusts the technician. The technician trusts the menu. If the menu is ambiguous, the system gets programmed wrong. Your sensors might be brand new and perfectly functional. They might also be programmed for a completely different vehicle. The Huff Bay-along sensors used on certain European imports from 2015 had a learn mode issue. After installing new sensors or rotating tires, the vehicle needed to relearn sensor positions so it knew which corner was reporting which pressure. The Huff sensors required a very specific drive cycle to complete the learn, 20 minutes at speeds above 30 mph with no stops. If you lived in a city, that was nearly impossible. If you tried to complete the cycle and hit traffic, the learn would fail. The system would assign sensor IDs randomly. Your dashboard might show the left front pressure when it was actually reading the right rear. Dangerous if you had a slow leak and the display told you the wrong tire. Huff updated the learn procedure in 2016 to allow stationary learn with a scan tool, but earlier vehicles needed the drive cycle unless the dealer manually programmed them. Some owners never successfully completed a learn. They drove for years with TPMS displaying random corner data. The system was active, it was just telling them about the wrong tires. Every single one of these systems passed federal approval at the time. They met the minimum legal standard. And that standard was written in the blood of the people who died before TPMS was required at all. The systems got better because the failures got documented. Because engineers kept tightening the specifications. Because every loophole that let a sensor report safe at dangerous pressures eventually got closed. Next time you see that little TPMS light on your dash and you think about ignoring it because the tires look fine, remember that the system itself might be the thing that is wrong. Not the tire, the sensor, the calibration, the threshold, the interference, the programming. Check the actual pressure. Do not trust the light to save you. Drop a comment and tell me which of these you have actually experienced, because I guarantee some of you have been driving on the wrong pressure for years and never knew it. Next time I am covering the safety features that were supposed to be standard on every car by 2020 and somehow still are not, even though the technology has existed for 15 years. Some of them would save thousands of lives. You will want to know why they are not required yet. And before you go, I want to acknowledge something important. The systems we covered today are not inherently evil designs. They were genuine attempts to solve a real problem with the technology available at the time. The engineers who built these systems were trying to make driving safer. The manufacturers who installed them were responding to regulatory pressure and market demand. But here's the thing about safety systems. When they fail, they do not just fail to help. They actively betray trust. They create a false sense of security that is often more dangerous than no system at all. A driver who does not have TPMS will check their pressures regularly because they know they have to. A driver whose TPMS is malfunctioning will trust that light until the moment the tire explodes. That is not a feature of the system. That is a liability. The regulatory framework around TPMS has genuinely improved over the past 2 decades. The Tread Act that followed the Firestone disaster set a foundation. But even today there are gaps. The accuracy requirements tight, but there is still no federal standard for alert speed on the Mitsubishi i-MiEV delay issue. There is still no requirement that shops verify their diagnostic and programming tools against a master gauge. There is still no mandate that fleet monitoring systems update in real time rather than every 4 hours. These are not oversights. They are places where the regulatory threshold remains at the legal minimum rather than the safety maximum. What I want you to take away from this is not paranoia about your TPMS system. Most modern systems work well. The newer regulations actually work. If your vehicle is less than 10 years old and your sensors have been properly installed and programmed, the odds are very good that your dashboard reading is trustworthy. But trust should never replace verification. Your eyes on the tires once a month. A manual pressure check with a handheld gauge that you maintain and verify yourself. These take 5 minutes and cost nothing. Compare what you see on the dash to what you measure in the tire. If they match, great, your system is working. If they do not match, now you have caught it before the tire fails catastrophically at 70 miles per hour on a highway. The tire pressure monitoring systems we use today are infinitely better than what they were 15 years ago. But better does not mean perfect. Better means the manufacturers have been forced to eliminate the most obvious failure modes. The subtle ones, the edge cases, the situations where the system is technically compliant but practically dangerous, those still exist. They just exist in older vehicles and specialized situations and rare combinations of circumstances. That does not make them safe, it just makes them less obvious. I also want to point out that the responsibility for improving these systems did not come from manufacturers proactively seeking perfection. It came from documented failures, from regulatory pressure after people died, from investigations and recalls and technical service bulletins and firmware updates that sometimes were not pushed widely enough. Every Titan specification represents a problem that had to be severe enough to force action. Every improvement is a memorial to a failure that should not have happened in the first place. So check your tires, check them manually, check them regularly, check them especially before long drives, before winter, before hot summer weather where tire pressure changes dramatically. Teach your family to do the same. Do not become complacent just because you have a fancy monitoring system. That system is a tool, not a guarantee. The responsibility for your safety ultimately rests with you and what you actually know about your vehicle rather than what the dashboard tells you to believe. Thanks for watching this entire deep dive into systems that fail to save lives and sometimes cost them instead. If you found value in understanding how these safety systems broke down and what the regulatory response was, please subscribe. I'm releasing a full investigation next week into dashboard warning lights that activate after your vehicle is already in danger, giving you the illusion of time to react when you actually have seconds. You will be shocked at how many of your dashboard warnings are reactive rather than predictive. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it.